It is an extremely important piece of information that everybody really has to be up to speed on, because we as a community are investors in our school district. And we want to know what's happening with our money, basically. We want to know whether it's being used properly. We want to know whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And schools are supposed to educate students. And that is really what the goal is. And we ask ourselves all the time, how are we doing? And so this is the somewhat of the answer that we're looking for, is how are we doing? Now, a lot of things have been on hold and put aside because of COVID, but the kiddos are still going to school every day. They're still being taught. We're still spending money. Are we spending it for what students need? And so when the 1.5% budget was first presented by the Finance Committee and the school board, it seemed to be reasonable, that it was within our means, so we could do what we needed to do. And unfortunately, it went down, and we're coming back with the school board at least is coming back with a different set of numbers and a different set of applications of that $55 million. So that's the basic introduction as to what we intend to do here tonight, is to let people know how that $55 million needs to be spent, and whether or not there is enough information being put out so that the community understands what it is that a school district needs to do with that money.
Absolutely. That's good. And in terms of information, that's the problem. There's too much information floating around out there. There's good information, there's bad information, there's a lot of disinformation. A lot of local pundits that are offering their opinions that are absolutely incorrect, and they're not based in facts or reality. I would challenge some of those folks to provide the basis for their assertions, because as many folks know, I had a lot to do with the 1.5% budget, and I know this 1,500 line budget pretty well, and can pretty much talk about anything anybody wants. So if folks have questions, I'm glad to answer questions, but I want to say, as a sitting board member, I'm not going to advocate a position of you should vote for this or you shouldn't vote for that, but I'd be glad to answer any questions to the best of my ability, and how I understand them, because I think the disinformation and all the folks that are spreading it are doing a very big disservice to our community, but most importantly to our schools and our kids.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions I have, because I recognize it, and I've asked it a couple of times now, I know that the verbiage has changed as well, from when the money was asked for last time to when the money is being asked for this time. And so, one, I would like to know why that change was made, if you know, but what that change is.
Yep, that's a good question. So for anyone out there that's not sure what this is, Raylene is talking about the ballot language, right? So when you go to the ballot box and cast your vote, you read an article on the ballot, and it gives you a bunch of stuff. The budget is blah 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 percent, and it's this amount. In round one of the budget vote, it included a line that expressed the per pupil spending amount and what the percentage increase was of that amount year over year. For this next vote that we're going to see on May 9th, that language has been removed. And I know there's a lot of people that are upset about that. The part of your question, why did that get removed? I'm not going to assume anyone's intentions. It was a split vote on the board. Mm-hmm. I voted against removing it because I think, for consistency's sake and transparency, it should be there. So that language has been removed, and the language that is removed was essentially that with a 5% budget, as everyone can imagine, the per pupil spending number is higher, mm-hmm. and it is a 10.6% increase year over year, which is good, right? That was one of the main criticisms of a lot of folks is, hey, we're underfunding our education. We're one of the lowest spendings. Well, this 5% budget is a 10.6% increase. That's a significant jump in the per pupil thing. Some context on this. So it is perfectly appropriate and legal to do this because the legislature just this year and Governor Scott signed the bill that allows this language or allows ballot language to be modified. This is a post-COVID extension for some special rules because of what we've had to do with COVID. He did sign the bill to allow this to happen. It's temporary. It's not permanent. It is temporary. But one thing that I think is very interesting that a lot of people don't know, Governor Scott signed it, but was very clear that he had serious concerns about removing per pupil spending increases in percentage numbers from ballots because he felt it was not transparent and certainly affects transparency in education spending. So I think that's a really important point that people need to understand. The governor approved it and said it's okay to remove it, but he's not in favor of it. So, I think it's important for folks to know this is a 10.6% increase in per pupil spending in our district. Is that a good explanation?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's significant. That's troublesome.
Yeah.
And I know that for some, I made the comment earlier about the 10.6 and said I can't afford that. And there are some people that says it only equates to like $80 or $85. So let me equate that $80 or $85. That's insulin for me.
Yep.
For half a month.
Yep.
And I know that $85 may not seem like a big deal to some people, but to me, it is a very big deal. And I understand that some people get tax credits. Those tax credits still get paid by somebody. They still, that money comes
It's not magic.
from somewhere. Right. It's not magic. So, does that mean, that money is coming from somebody else in the city or the town that is paying more money than I pay, and so that doesn't make it right. It makes it so that I can maybe have an ease, but it certainly doesn't ease everyone.
That's right. Well, and for folks that are familiar with the land use or current use program for property taxes, right? So if someone owns a large chunk of property, they can apply to their town and get their tax obligation for that property reduced through current use. And yes, it reduces what the amount that they have to pay. The amount that they pay just doesn't disappear. The rest of every Vermonter takes a share of that. Well, now there's 650,000 of us, so each of our shares is very small, but that tax burden doesn't go away. It just shifts from the person that pays the whole amount to every Vermonter that pays property taxes. So we all share in that. I like that you brought up that you were concerned with a 10.6% increase in per pupil spending because there's some confusion there as well. The
Yes.
budget increase, this budget increase for round 2 is a 5% budget increase. And folks get a little hung up on some of these percentages. And in the first round, the budget 1.5%. There's a lot of people saying, "Oh my goodness, inflation is 8%. And you're only doing 1.5%." But it's not 1.5% on every single line. It was a 1.5% total budget increase. Some lines would increase more, some lines would increase less, and it's the same thing here. Yes, this is a 5% overall budget increase, but per pupil spending would increase 10.6%. In just a piece for people to understand, per pupil spending is not based on the whole $55 million in this budget, right? So people, when they look at this budget or they hear us talking about it, this budget's $55 million. The per pupil spending is only based on the education spending money coming from the state. So that number, and I got to look at the piece of paper, is $37 million. That's the number that per pupil spending is based on. It's not based on the whole $55 million, right? And then some other concerns with that is, oh my goodness, the per pupil spending number is the lowest in the state. No, it's not. It's one of the lowest, but it's not the lowest in the state. However, and this is a number that I know a lot of people, especially the critics, don't like, but the per pupil spending number is a very convoluted calculation based on demographics, right? So it is what it is. It's just the way that Vermont does education funding. If you want to see what we're actually spending per student, take the total numbers that our budget is, $55 million, and divide it by actual students. That number is $24,707. $25,000 a year per student. That is absolutely on par with most every school around us and many others. So we are not underfunding our kids. Even at the 1.5%, we weren't underfunding our kids. So those are just real numbers, right? It's simple math. If you take the total budget number divided by the number of students, there's the number all in.
And my question, just like yours, has always been impact.
Yep.
That what does any budget, a municipal budget, a school budget, a state budget, how does that impact the taxpayers? And so I was looking at that for a long time now. And one of the things is that in Barre City, the preponderance of registered voters rent. And so if a municipal budget, a school budget, if that increases, then there is no other alternative except the rent is going to increase. So when you think about that, that really impacts people's lives, because if you're raising rates at a level of 5%, 10%, you're increasing the amount of hours that someone has to work. That, for example, if someone is earning $16, $17 an hour and their rent goes up by $200, they would have to literally work 13 extra hours a week to pay for that rent. Mm-hmm. And that's a tremendous impact on families that are in that particular situation. So we have to be cognizant of that. And there are
And fixed income families.
very much so fixed income, but always making sure that we're not taking that line of people that are just above the poverty line, that those folks who aren't eligible for any services, who are working, they're the working poor is what they are, mm-hmm. and drive them down into the poverty level. So the purpose of education is to lift people up, get them educated so that they can move up the economic ladder, they can understand what's happening in the world, and we want to make sure that we are spending our dollars to do that, so that those who have to work extra hard to meet those requirements of paying the rent, paying the taxes, feeding their children, maintaining a home, that they are preserved in all of this. Mm-hmm. And that has always been my biggest fear, is that if we're spending our money, our school money, on shiny tractors and things that really aren't going to affect student achievement, that's a concern. And so we need to be cognizant of that where are the tools that students need to work? Where are the books? We certainly heard during the last setup for the budget that parents were saying their children were using the books with their parents' names in them. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge issue. Well, why aren't we buying new books?
Right, because we learned then that the departments had the money, they just weren't spending the money.
Right, and so...
Well, that's what I learned at a meeting.
Yes, students they need the tools to learn. And what the community needs to know is a huge issue with me as well. Where are the reports that say how the kids are doing? Mm-hmm. That's really important. And even, you know what, even if they're not doing quite well right now.
That's okay.
That's okay.
We need to know that.
We understand that. Mm-hmm. And then we can say as a community, well, this is what we need to do. Mm-hmm. So schools have, and I'll explain it from the school point of view, schools have classroom teachers. They have support personnel. They have plans. And right at the moment, schools across the state of Vermont have lots of plans. They have recovery plans that they were mandated to create. They have strategic plans. They have federal program investment plans for what used to be called the title money that comes into schools. So give us reports on those. How are the kids doing on those plans? Are those plans being implemented? And are we seeing the success with?
Are we
with the
getting what we're
students?
paying for?
Yes, because that's our product.
And that brings up a question. Pat says, how about someone explain why the district pays teachers at a higher pay for a degree they don't in fact have, i.e. paying teachers an amount that a teacher with a master's might get when they didn't have it?
So that's a good question. So if we're talking about teaching staff, so that's all in the teaching contract, right? So there's a salary schedule, and there's when a new teacher or a person comes to work for the district for one of the schools, they are placed on the schedule based on their years of experience and their degrees, right? So if you have a person, and I'm only guessing what this person's asking, but if you have a person that maybe has a bachelor's degree but has 25 years of experience, their placement's going to be much higher, right? Because they've got a lot of experience in the field. If versus maybe someone that has a master's degree and has 2 years of experience, right? And I don't know the numbers right off the top of my head.
And that's the case at a lot of places of employment.
Yep.
I mean, if you go in there and you've had a lot of street smart,
Yep.
as opposed to book smart,
Yep.
you actually may make more money,
Right.
And so that actually does happen.
Yeah, and with the schools, there's only one person that has discretion, and that's typically the superintendent in that placement, right? So they can kind of take into consideration other factors and say, based on this or based on that, we can bump them up, bump them down. But it's all contractual, right? There's no secrets here. If anybody wants to see this stuff, you go on the district website, and the teacher's contract is in there, and all the salary schedules and all that stuff, and the methodology that's used to place them on that schedule.
So
And that's a negotiated item.
Yep.
So
Right.
that isn't a flat fee in the budget. That happens every few years in our district. Just happens to be this is a negotiation year.
Yeah.
So that's the piece that's going on now.
Yeah, when I was in school, the teachers went on strike because that was back in like 88, 89, because they hadn't come up with a plan yet and hadn't agreed. And that's what happened for a little bit of time. But speaking of that as well, and teachers and pay and contracts, so the first round we heard the superintendent and I believe several of the board members say that whatever was taken out with the 1.5 was going to be put back with if their budget was approved. Do we know if that happening?
So yeah, we do know that that's happening, and forgive me, I should have wrote down which packet anybody could have gone and looked to find this, but this is all information that's included in packets, which are all public on the district website. But no, there were two options coming out of the budget defeat. Option one was the 5% budget, which is what was moved forward, and then a 6.5% increase. And in neither of those options was everything brought back, which is a little concerning, right? Because and I know specifically in two meetings I brought this up that while I supported the 1.5% budget, I did hear the concerns of the people that were expressing their concerns in that, hey, we want sports brought back in, we want these staff members, these current staff members that were cut brought back in, and not everything is being brought back in, which is a little concerning. And should still be concerning. And I would encourage those folks to reach out to board members and the superintendent and say, hey, we were told that this was coming back.
Right.
Why isn't it? Right. So, that
they
is
said
accurate.
if they got the
Everything-
money that they asked for, then these things would not disappear.
Right.
And if that's not happening, but they're still getting the money that they originally asked for, then why?
Right. And many
That's-
things
I
are
would
being
like-
brought back, but there are definitely some that are not. And some are being brought back partially, right? So, I have the whole list right here in front of me. I'm not going to go through it again. People can look on the website and find the meeting that we discussed.
Can you give
this.
a couple of, for instances?
So there were, let's see, some clerical staff that was cut that has not been brought back. there are some. Let's see. There's a couple that were really big ones. Was the K through 8 athletics and clubs, and the majority of it was brought back. 130,000 was taken out. Only 120 was brought back in. Field trips and co-curricular transportation. This was a big deal, right? Field trips and clubs and all those things. It came out at 60,000. Only 50,000 went back in. And there's just a bunch of stuff like that as you go down the list that weren't brought back in. And honestly,
Are there some
why not?
positions as well?
There are.
There are.
Yep.
There are positions so that
There's
like a
positions that
whole
were moved into
person
county.
eliminated.
Yep. So,
And yeah,
yeah.
but we're saying we need everything.
Yep.
So, but we're going to eliminate a person.
Yeah, and again, I'm not, for the folks that participate in board meetings, have heard the administration's explanations of these things. Again, I'm not gonna sit here and second guess them or assume their intentions of why they did or didn't do. I can just say that this is factually not everything came back.
Right,
And, if you
and
wanna-
factually, it can be seen. If
Yep.
you really want to know, you can read it
Yep.
with your own eyes. You don't have to
Yep.
hang on any
Right.
word that we said here tonight.
Right, it's in
You
paper.
can literally read it on your own.
Yep, and I would encourage anyone that has questions about that wants a deeper understanding to reach out to school board members or the superintendent and say, why didn't these things come back in, right?
Right.
Because I don't want to speak for anyone else. I can only speak for myself. I don't speak for the board. I'm here speaking only for myself. So
Right.
Yep.
And because you were kind enough to do so, because there are a lot of people with a lot of questions that don't understand. It's a lot of information.
it's a lot of information.
And
Yep.
it happened fast, and there's been a lot of emotions
Mm-hmm.
wrapped in it all. In most of everything we do nowadays, there's so much emotion, and so to be able to have a discussion and have a free conversation of this is how it is, and you can read it too. You don't have to hang on our word here tonight. It's all
Yeah,
available
you don't have
to
to listen
you.
to either camp. You can
Yeah.
make up your own mind, which is what you
Yeah,
should be doing
that's
anyway,
what you
right?
should do.
Yep.
And that's what I said. I've had a couple of people say, how should I vote? One
Yep.
person actually wrote that right on as a comment on my page. How should I vote? And I said, you vote what you think.
Yeah.
Not what I think. You vote what you think.
I get that question
So-
a lot as well as a sitting board member. Well, how are you going to vote, or how would you advocate that we vote? That's not my role. My role is to give you the information, and you need to make up your own decision. I shouldn't be swaying. I don't think it's appropriate for a sitting school board member to advocate a position, right? I
No.
don't think I should be out here campaigning to win this or beat this. That's not appropriate. That's not my role. My role is to represent my entire community, and if I take a position publicly and campaign for it, I'm not fulfilling my duties, and I think that is incredibly irresponsible of a sitting board member to do that.
And I always like to have a little fun with this type of discussion because it can be really scary when you talk about $55 million.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is a lot of money. And,
It is a lot.
And so what I did is I asked a friend who worked at a bank to actually put $1,000 in $100 bills on the postage scale. And $1,000 in $100 bills weighs just about 1 ounce. So I extrapolated it out. That how much does $55 million in $100 bills actually weigh?
That's a lot.
It weighs as much as 3 Priuses.
I was going to say 1 pallet
Wow.
of money, but it sounds like 3 pallets of money.
And
Wow.
So so you put it in context that's that's the way. That's more money than people see in their entire lifetimes, probably
Well,
a couple of lifetimes over. And you want that to be put to the highest and best use.
Yeah.
And as far as schools are concerned, and this has always been my total focus, is you want the students to move from point A to point B. That when they come into the classroom, if they have this amount of knowledge and this amount of skills, so be it. And then during the course of a school year, you move them to a different, a more advanced position. And I always say my favorite example of this is the 9s times tables. The 9s times tables in the 3rd grade. By the end of the 3rd grade, have all the kiddos in the class mastered the 9s times tables.
Yeah.
That's a huge issue. To really show that you don't have to use standardized tests and results of standardized tests. You can say the kiddos in this class in this third grade can have all mastered the 9s times tables, and they all can pick up a book and feel comfortable reading that book, regardless of what the level is. They're comfortable reading, that they know that that's a way to obtain information. And so that's what we want to see our money used for in schools, is student achievement, student growth, and mastering the 9s times tables.
Education, what a concept.
Yes.
Right.
And for perspective, $55 million school budget, that is way higher than the Barrie and Barrytown combined municipal budgets, way higher. So that's a huge pile of money.
That is a huge pile of money. We do have some more questions. So one of them is, what is budgeted for teacher raises? Do we know?
So no, we don't know, and we're in a negotiation year, which is all in executive session. So sorry, we can't talk about it.
Okay. And then another question is, what increases are administrators set to see, and what did they get the last couple of years? Is that also?
How come I knew that question was going to come up? No, so administrators are not under a contract, right, or not under a labor agreement. So this is a topic that's got a lot of people a little cranked up. Is administrator, and when we say administrators, you have the superintendent's administrator, the district directors are administrators, the principals in the buildings are administrators. Last year, in the last year and a half, the superintendent took it upon himself to decide that administrator pay needed to go up. We need to be on par or higher so we could be competitive with districts around us, and in some cases Chittenden County. So he implemented a salary metric for those people, and it was never approved by the board. So this is not me complaining. This is fact, right? There was never a board vote to say we accept this salary metric and we're going to do it. It was done. It was implemented. It was put into place, and we continue to move forward. So, but I want to preface this also by saying that please don't be upset with administrators. Our principals work really, really hard. These are some incredibly hardworking people that put in long days. So I will never sit down and beat up a principal on what they're making for pay. The process behind this salary metric, I got an issue with that personally, right? I don't think it had transparency. I don't think it should have been approved by the board, whatnot. But yes, there were some fairly large salary increases that were made. There is now a salary metric. And there's been some issues with it, right? It's changed, and a lot of it is discretionary, which I have a problem with. So those percentages off the top of my head, I could probably give you a couple examples I might have written down here.
I think one of the things that I came up with, 75% of the budget goes to salaries and benefits.
Yep.
And so included in that are the principals, the superintendent, the directors of various departments.
Yep.
And so,
All employees,
and that's probably par for the course. But again, are those folks overseeing the fact that our students are making progress, are achieving what they're set out to achieve, and that the families have an understanding of what's happening in schools? Because the largest correlation of influx of monies into a school district is really to make sure that the families understand what the kiddos are supposed to be. And I say kiddos, meaning everybody from you must be this tall to get on this ride to you can't get on this one because you're too tall, all the way up through all our schools, is that families have to understand what students are up against, and so they can support them. And that's extremely important to do that. That's where you see the biggest achievement growth in students, is if you spend dollars to keep families informed.
And then we get a comment that's from Rachel that says, not every child will be the same. Assuming we can control them all based on an adult standard ideal is not realistic.
I don't think, you hear a lot, you get into this stuff, and I'm sure a lot of people listening know this. You get into this stuff, you will meet all kinds of people that have children that have this issue, that issue, or some of my kids have had these issues, IEPs or whatever else the case may be. I wholeheartedly agree with Rachel. We cannot put a kid in a box. We can't put every kid in a box. Our schools need to be nimble. Our schools need to be able to adapt and teach children what they need to know, how they need to know it. Right.
Right.
And I've seen that personally. So I would agree.
But
with
giving
Rachel.
them more money isn't going to help.
It's not
that.
necessarily the answer. If it is the answer, then I think that's a much easier conversation to have with our community, right?
Right.
If we could say,
Right.
hey, if I give you $10 million more, and they can come back and say, you give us $10 million, we can do A, B, C, no problem. It's
Right.
getting
We
done.
can make sure that these kids are.
I think this community's behind it. I really do. I really
too.
do. So I would agree with Rachel that I don't think we should ever be putting any kid in a box and cookie cutter. Nope, that's not where we're at. Sorry.
Right.
I agree with her. Yep.
Yeah, me too. It's. I mean, that's the way it's been for a long time, and that's the way it should be.
Yep.
We hope, but it's not always the case.
Right.
And that's what my whole career was dedicated to, what is now called special education. And they were the individuals, students who learned differently. And we had a lot of fun doing it. And, but you still saw success, and you still, as a professional, were able to record those successes. And that's really important too, to be able to record those successes and share them with not only your fellow staff members, but share them in the community as well. So,
Right.
because special education gets beaten up all the time.
Yes, it does.
They get blamed for inflated budgets. They get blamed for difficulties within the school, for discipline, for whatever it might be. And that's not the case. That these are kiddos who learn differently. And so you have to be able to teach differently as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Alice. I think special ed absolutely gets a bad rap. There's a lot of kids that have what do we call them? Accommodations that are really mild. You wouldn't even know, right?
Right,
And-
you have no idea.
You have no idea.
My son has
we
some.
have them from both ends of the spectrum and across the spectrum. So it is tough that special ed gets categorized that way, because some kids, it's as simple as, hey, use this kind of pencil versus that kind of pencil or whatever, right? So yeah,
Right. Yeah. A tablet or
And certainly
anything.
education
Yes.
as a field has modified so that it wasn't that you were just a successful student or you're a special ed student. Now there's all the gradients in between, the multi-tiered systems of support, all these other applications that have been developed throughout the years, so that it's a wonder, but it's still, special education should not be blamed for the inflated prices of education.
I agree. Yeah. It's an easy fall or
Yep.
target,
Oh,
I'm
oh,
sure,
yeah,
but
sure.
That doesn't make it right. It should not. That
Because-
should not happen.
I have to be careful so I don't lapse into my special education routine. Special education is the only area of education that was created by the courts. Everything else came out of research and development and looking at how brains work and how physical and mental coordination and things like that. Special education was mandated, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and was mandated and has to be done according to the rules and regulations of the federal government.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah.
And I love every minute of it, but there are parts of it that when I open up
Yeah. It's hard.
IDEA,
And then we get into the behavior issues, and the thing about school, and for me, or my thoughts of it all, is school has become a lot more than just school. And compared to, when I was in school, our parents did the reprimanding, and when we were in school, we were learning, and we were respectful, or we knew that when we got home, we were going to pay for it. That we just knew better. And now society has changed where not every kid is even afforded that opportunity to be able to go home and have that soft place to land or the hard hand that they may need. And I don't mean that like physically
right?
smacking anybody, but it has become a full-time job and a part-time home for some. And schools are, I agree, dealing with a lot more than they ever did before. But was some of that, did we bring some of that on ourselves in saying, some of it I have to believe comes from both parents trying to work full time, and not in every case, but a lot of cases. And there's just a lot of stuff that we can't all do on our own. And it is tiring the teachers out, and they are fed up, and I can understand. So what can we do as a community to help these kids and these parents? And I think the best thing that we could do is be honest about what we need, and to be honest about where our kids are at. If I would much rather somebody say to me, your kid did a really bad job, or this is not okay, then skate around that fact, because let's work on the problem. Let's not try to sugarcoat anything. And I know I'm going to catch hell right now, but I am not a firm believer in everybody gets a trophy. I'm just not. It's okay if kids learn that not everything in life is grand and great all the time. And I can't help but think if all of our kids knew that, then the kids that are suffering and feel like that every day, it would be easier for a teacher to teach, and because we would have that compassion and realization for each other, and not just in the students, but the teachers as well. There's a lot of stuff that we can fix that has nothing to do with money.
Right.
I guess is
That's
my
the-
bottom
that's the
line.
big issue.
My bottom line is there's a lot of things just in society that we could fix
When
without
you're
money.
talking about budgets and money, the overall premise is to spend what you have wisely, so that it benefits the students, the families, the community. And that really is overall. You want the students to be engaged, so you want to have the materials there, you want to have the tools, you want to have teachers well trained, and that's something that we do here in the Barre School District. We do that very well. We have an opportunity for students, or for teachers rather, to be continuing students, so they are lifelong learners, and how to master new and different elements of their craft. So we're very cognizant of that and have that in the budget so that teachers can continue their education. We also have a tremendous amount of professional development, which is a good thing because, as you say, things are constantly changing in education. And as the world flicks by at internet speed, things are constantly changing, and teachers have to keep up with that. So the professional development, very important piece. But again, when you circle that around, teachers improving their craft, teachers having professional development, how does that impact in the classroom, and what are the outcomes for students? So spending the money wisely is really an overgeneralization and probably overused, but that's really what needs to be done. And the outcome of that is then offering good reports to the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the people that aren't necessarily having students in the district. They are the people who don't have students in the district, but they still want to know how the kids are doing and what the accomplishments are. We saw it this year. I just continue. We saw it with a lot of sports. We see it every year at graduation with the scholarships. We really want that to continue, and we want our kids to be able to go out into the world so that they can be successful, they can be competitive. And not only with what they're doing, if they're going into the world of work, if they're going into post-secondary education, they need to be competitive. We need to prepare them. And how do you do that? You spend the money wisely.
I agree with all that, Alice. In terms of behavior, so I think I think behavior is the biggest issue that we face in our schools today. It simply is, and like you said, how do we fix that? Well, one of the big issues that we have is there are massive philosophical differences in how we address that, right? And I think some of this is generational, right? If you're my age and from my generation, sounds like you as well. You grew up in a little bit sterner home than maybe some kids do today. And I'm not judging anybody's parents and how they raise kids. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. However, right, some folks feel like that this process should be much different and that the school should play a much bigger role. And then there's others, and I happen to be the same thing. Schools are for education. Schools aren't to be raising kids. And I think this started or really got a big jump start with Act 46 and these school mergers, right? I think when these school mergers happened, we were sold a bill of goods that this is going to improve schools, it's going to improve educational opportunities, we're going to save money, everything's going to get better, and it hasn't. And one of the things that I think happened with Act 46 is it was a further deterioration of local control in our schools, right? Our schools, what happens in our schools is being dictated at the national level and at the state level, not so much at the local level anymore. And I think that's a big problem, because I think if it was more local, there might be more movement on the behavior issues, but certainly something that we have to pay attention to, because I think it is the biggest issue that we're facing in our schools.
I think that it's odd that they don't assemble anymore in schools. I think that is odd, that they don't bring kids together all as one, and so that they can.
That may be a COVID or a post-COVID outcome of the COVID.
No, I think
cycle,
it was
right?
even before.
It was before.
Yeah,
okay.
they just stopped doing that, and I always relate it back to drinking and driving. When I was in school and we lost kids to drinking and driving, and a couple of them were back to back my junior year, and their car was in the parking lot, and we assembled and we talked about that, and it was very much brought to attention. And I kind of feel like the same thing should happen when you're talking about, you should assemble about bullying, and you should, if you have a handful of kids that are bullying, whether it's students or teachers that they're bullying, because they do both, if you have that handful of students that sits in a room, a sea of 150, 200 kids, and you see that those 150 kids think that the 10 of you are real asshats, I think that it simmers it down a little bit, because they see that they're really not as popular as they thought they were. And it just always is strange to me that they don't try to address some of... I know that it can't fix everything, just like money can't fix everything. But I just find we just try to do everything so divided now.
Well, I think some of it too, in fairness, right? Because it'd be nice to snap our fingers and think everything can happen, but the regulations that these folks in the schools have to follow, especially in terms of behaviors and bullying and hazing and harassment and God forbid sexual stuff or any of that stuff, the regulations are intense. Intense. So I don't know them that well, and I'm sure someone that knows them better than I could certainly speak to this, but I'm sure there's a lot of very defined parameters on what they can do and can't do and when they can do it.
Right, so, how they can talk about it and what they can say. So and
if I had to guess, that may be a big contributing factor to that.
And that's too bad. It's too bad that government has gotten that involved with it, that we can't even decide as a group of parents, this is how we want to address this issue, these issues as a community, as a board, as PTO, let's talk about these things and see what we can do to help, because a school budget isn't going to fix that.
Nope.
There are ways for parents to come together, as you say, PTOs, parent meetings, parent advisory councils, all of those type of activities that parents can be involved with, which again gets the information out there. That's the biggest piece that I've seen in successful school districts, is there is constant communication between the school and the community, whether it be articles in the newspaper and reaching everybody, that having saying, well, everybody's we're putting this out on our website. Well, not everybody goes to the school website, but people do read the newspapers. They do, talk to their neighbors.
Right. Maybe go to parent groups at the library or play
something.
groups,
or see
Yeah.
a poster at the library or something. So, but that continual information flow from a district out into the community is always a really solid way to not only build support, but let people know that their investment is paying off. And it is an investment in the community's future to wisely spend their money, their taxpayer dollars. It's an investment in the future for the community, and that's certainly what every community needs and wants.
Okay, and so somebody wants us to just explain one more time. I wrote that I cannot afford the 10.6. Yes, when I look at the poster, does the 10.6 stick out more to me? Absolutely. And I believe it did because I believe that I saw that first because I think that's the way it's been portrayed to me in the past, is per pupil as opposed to. And so can we explain the 10.6 to the 5, and can we explain, are they asking for more money now than they did the first time?
Yes. So that the first one is yes. So this is 3.5% more than the budget that got defeated. Right?
And what is that in real money?
So that's I think it's a $2.3 million increase, right? So this is a 5% budget versus a 1.5% budget. So it is 3.5%. They're asking for 3.5% more money than they did the first time, than we did the first time. So that's the first piece. So the 5% increase is on the budget overall, right? So the 10.6 number is on the per pupil spending number, which, as I said earlier, per pupil spending is not based on the whole $55 million. It is based on education spending that comes from Montpelier. It is based on that. That number is increasing 10.6%. Those are real dollars. They're different percentages, but it is real dollars. So on that specific portion of the budget and the education spending coming from the state, the amount that's going to be spent per kid, and again, it's just a calculation. It's really not a number to get hung up on like a lot of folks do. It's increasing 10.6%. So again, for a lot of the people that were concerned, we're one of the lowest in the state. Well, that should make people happy, right? 10.6, although it's a big number, we got to pay for it. So, but the budget overall, if you go all the way to the bottom of this 1,500-page budget, that number at the bottom is 5% bigger than it was last year. That's the difference. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's 5% more than it was last year. Last year, we had a surplus.
Yep.
And it was not the first year that we had a surplus.
Well, and remember, when we say last year today, that's last year, but to this budget that we're talking about, it would actually be 2 years ago, right? So,
Right.
So the school year that just ended in June of 2023.
Right.
Yes.
June of 22 is FY22. That school year generated a $2.3 million surplus. So monies that weren't spent, $2.3 million. The current year that we're in, FY23, is also projecting to have another surplus. And I'm sure, I'm surprised there's not questions about this, because this is something that a lot of folks had questions about. Well, you're relying on surplus money. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because if year after year we are generating surplus funds, we in the community, why are we giving you this money that you're not spending? And it essentially just gets put into an account.
Right, and we have books with our names in them from 1972.
Yeah. And I think an important year to remember is, and I'm sure everyone remembers this, the year it took 3 votes to pass our school budget, right? That was 2 years ago or 3 years ago at this point. Took 3 times to pass that school budget. That budget that took 3 times to pass generated a $2.9 million surplus. So had it passed the first pass, what would that surplus have been? 3.5, 4? Who knows? We don't know.
Right.
It was reduced twice before it passed, and it still generated $3 million of surplus funds. Right. So, There's been a lot of talk about surplus funds. Hey, it is what it is. It's extra money that the district has that gets put into these special accounts. We call them reserve funds, and they get used for specific things, right? There's definitely been some misinformation about, oh, well, this 1.5% budget relies on this and this, and you can't do this. No kidding, you can't do that. There's very specific rules for how you can use that money, right? So, surpluses are okay to a certain extent. I think the last time I looked at the number, we were sitting on in our surplus account $6.5 million of cash, right? That's cash money sitting there. Yes, it can only be used certain ways, but think about
But
that.
it's still sitting there.
Right. So
Right.
and I think, people need to make up their own mind. Is that acceptable or not acceptable? Right.
Right. What percentage is that of
Yeah.
the budget that
Yep.
we're looking for?
Yep.
It's significant.
It's a lot of money.
It is. And so we have that. We have the surplus. We have the difference between. We touched on the verbiage, so we took care of that because that I did not understand. That part I will wholeheartedly admit I did not understand the verbiage and what it meant to take one thing out and replace it with the other.
Right.
And when I hear it though, and I learn, it does seem deceitful to me that they would change it midstream and or for a revote. Let's just vote it the same exact way it was voted on the first time with the new numbers, and let's not play semantics with
Yep.
Right.
with everything. It's just not. Yeah, we don't want to do that.
And I think another piece that we in this particular community and in the state need to be cognizant of is the fact that we have a tremendously declining student population. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword. With a declining school population, maybe you can do a little bit more with fewer. The kids aren't elbow to elbow in the hallway, and you don't have classes with 35 students in them that you can accomplish a lot more. But then there are also the area that you have to think about, that if you're maintaining physical plants, what is the cost of maintaining a physical plant with half a student population in it? A building that was built for 1,600 students only has 500 in it now. That's a concern that has to be right on the top of the list for the community as well. And that comes into the budgeting process.
For sure.
So in Berrytown, we're voting on May 9th,
May 9th at the
Where?
Berrytown Elementary School,
7 to 7.
7
Yep.
to 7.
And in Berry City, we will be at the old Labor Hall,
on
which
Granite
is
Street.
a change. Usually
Yes.
we are up at the auditorium. We cannot be. And so the old Labor Hall, it will be. We'll make sure there's lots of signage.
Right.
But yeah, follow up.
Yeah.
Ask your questions.
Well, so for voting, so this is really important for folks. You can vote in person at those locations, or you can still request an absentee ballot at Berry City. You can call 802-476-0242 or email Carol Dawes at cdawes@berrycity.org. And at Berrytown, you can call 802-479-9391 or email Tina Lunt at tlunt@berrytown.org to request your absentee ballot. So no excuse
and I'll
not
get
to
that
participate.
all in there. I'll get all
In
that in there.
Berrytown, you can also go into the town clerk's office, and the ballots are available, and you could go in there and fill out your ballot and hand it to them
nice.
right then and there. So if you know it's going to be difficult to get in during the day on May 9th, you can vote in the town clerk's office.
Nice. And that's awesome.
It
and
is.
in the meantime, read up. If you are really that concerned and you're worried about what we've said or someone else has said, please take the time to read it yourself. It is all available to you. Educate yourself as much as you can and get out and vote.
Reach out and ask questions.
Yeah.
Board members are available. I have talked to a lot of people about the budget. And again, it's not my role to sway someone to vote for or against, but to provide information. So if anybody wants to have a conversation, I'm happy to explain this budget, show it to them, kick the tires, whatever you want to do. Because the worst thing to do is to just cast a vote because you're going with the crowd, the popular crowd or whatever. Make an informed decision, because this is a big one. This is $55 million. This is for our community. This is for our kids.
And what is the webpage that people go to for this, as far as?
So it's right on the BUUSD website, and if you go to the district website, BUUSD, under resources, there is a budget page.
Okay.
Yep.
And then they can also learn all of the names of the school board members
Yeah, those are all
from
in there
that
as well.
page.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And then that way, if you do want to contact any of them, that you can reach out to any one of them
Yep.
and get information. Get information from different ones if you want to.
And people talk about kitchen table items. This is a kitchen table item. Anything that affects something that has to come out of a person's pocket, basically, that's a kitchen table item. And people need to have as much information as they possibly can about that and know how it is going to affect them. And that's a huge issue. And make really an informed decision. There's a lot of emotion surrounding school budgets, and particularly this particular one. There's a lot of emotion, but it really has to be in reality. Because $55 million, those are real dollars.
Right.
A lot of
Yeah.
it's a lot of dollars.
That's a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It really is. It's a little bit frightening sometimes to even think about such a thing. And I mean, I understand it takes a lot and we're not talking about just a few kids, little school. It's a big district, a lot of kids, a lot of
2,300 kids. Yeah.
And when you see those big yellow buses out there rolling around every morning and every afternoon, that's the representation that a lot of people see of school.
Right.
And you want to know that the youngsters who are on those buses are getting the best education that they can possibly get, and that it is affordable for the community. That's really,
Right.
and not to cut anything out of that. Have it affordable for the community, because those same students will suffer if their families cannot afford
Right.
to pay the taxes.
Right. And we want to know that whatever money is given, no matter the budget, that it's being spent the right way. When just because the budget pass or fail, it doesn't mean that you still shouldn't be involved.
Right.
Everybody has the opportunity to be involved, and especially now with the ability for Zoom and so many ways that you can be involved and you can understand. You have time to ask your questions. And
All this information is
all
public. Every
all
bit
of
of
it's public, and everybody is open to speaking with you, and so you should be involved. And there are PTOs, there are all kinds of ways to insert yourself into your kids' education, and so please do it. And even if you don't have kids, and
that has one of the things I was involved in when I was on the board was the development of the strategic plan. And a piece of the strategic plan is to have involvement with the community members. So if people who do not have students in school have something to offer, they should also come forward and say, maybe a particular class or a particular grade would like to know more about this. And, just to be silly about it, we know someone who does balloons.
I wonder who that is.
Yes.
Michael.
And so if maybe someone wanted to do balloon animals at an assembly.
right.
But there are other folks who have other talents and skills and abilities and memories to share with students, because that's also what keeps a community going, is passing the stories from one generation to the next, the oral history of a community.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so very, very much for coming. Thanks to everyone who has tuned in. Please, if you are watching later, still ask your questions. We'll make sure that we can get some answers for you.
We could do this again. If there's more questions, we could do this again.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
could.
and
We
just have a whole period of question and answer.
Yeah, we're here every Monday night anyways, so ask away. We'll make sure that everybody has as much information and what information they want to have before the revote. And I will get the information that Terry just gave as far as voting, the wheres, the who's, the email addresses, phone numbers, things like that. I'll get that up on the page as soon as possible. And yeah, thank you all for coming, and tune in next week. Love to see you.